Ebla, the downfall of a Semitic kingdom. From the ancestors of Semites to the collapse of Semitic civilization, this is what this series is going to cover. So we already talked about the origins of Semites, which is either in Africa or it's with the Natufians, but basically the consensus is that in 4000 BC, Proto-Semites originated in the Levant. Then in 3750 BC, Semites would migrate from the Levant into Mesopotamia. In this video, we'll cover that migration. Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Natufians are highly likely the ancestors of Semites, and of course Natufians had haplogroup E. 4000 BC, Proto-Semites originated in the Levant, and Proto-Semites carried haplogroup E. Then in 3750 BC, Semites would migrate from the Levant into Mesopotamia and Arabia. Early Semites would have carried haplogroup E into Mesopotamia. Given the modern distribution of Semitic languages over the area in question, which belong to the larger Afro-Asiatic family, it seems appropriate to suggest that these first farmers of the Levant and their Mesolithic predecessors, including the Natufian culture, were speaking an Afro-Asiatic language. It may be that Proto-Semitic continued to develop within the Levant and Syria area, since both Eblite, which is what we'll be covering today, and Akkadian early Semitic languages are there attested early, the former around 2400 BC. So this is from Cambridge, and it basically sums up everything that I just said. Natufians being the ancestors or the actual Proto-Afro-Asiatic people, and then Proto-Semitic developing within the Levant and Syria, and Proto-Semites descending from those Natufian Proto-Afro-Asiatic peoples. And then let's get into haplogroup E. The Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist populations. And so that quote right there perfectly fits with what we said right here about Proto-Afro-Asiatic languages and the Natufians. By the way, this source is from Y chromosome haplogroup E or Y chromosome E haplogroups, their distribution and implication to the origin of Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralism. Afro-Asiatic speakers, the early Afro-Asiatic speakers are likely the first pastoralist populations, and they carried haplogroup E. So here is the various E clades we find in the Levant, as the other sources said, Natufians being connected to the Levant, and Afro-Asiatic being connected to Natufians, and all of this being taking place within the modern-day countries of Israel, Jordan, and Syria, and Lebanon, the Levant. So 4000 BC, Semites had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant. Again, this is the general region of the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean, 4000 BC. And then these Semites will migrate from the Levant through the Fertile Crescent into Mesopotamia, going all the way far as Sumer, and the Akkadians would be the ones to conquer these Sumerians, because the Sumerians were non-Semitic speakers. So 4000 BC, Proto-Semites, Levant origins. Then in 3750 BC, Semite or Semitic migrations from the Levant into Mesopotamia, and also they will go into Arabia. And this fits perfectly with DNA. According to the genetic analysis done on 6 Natufian remains from northern Israel, the Natufians carried the Y DNA haplogroup E-Z830, a somewhat upwind clade of E-M123, and therefore ancestral to it. The Natufians were one of the first settled peoples in the world and may have contributed to the domestication of certain crops and thus the advent of agriculture. And we've brought this up many times. Natufians being some of the earliest people to create small settlements and to be agriculturalist and pastoralist, which of course is very important to Semitic culture. The discovery of E-Z830 without other subclades suggests an indigenous presence in Canaan and Israel and predates all other clades, which are not known to have existed in the region at the time, 10,000 years before present. And so, again, we find basically very old clades of E among these Natufians. These Natufians had very old clades of E, and it's in the Levant. And what I'm going to demonstrate to y'all is how these E clades are old in the Levant, but as you go towards Mesopotamia, the E clades get younger. You begin to see them in the Chalcolithic and then in the Bronze Age. And basically, it's likely that migration of Semites carrying these E clades into Mesopotamia. So let's go into the next part of this reading. Haplogroup E1B1B1B2 has been found in 75% of the N gazelle population, along with 60% of PPNB, pre-pottery Neolithic B populations, circa 8,800 through 6,500 BC. So as we can see, the E clades are getting younger, or we're seeing people in later ages with these E clades. So up here it was around 10,000 BC. Now it's around 8,000 BC, and it's in pre-pottery B populations and the N gazelle populations. And we've studied this in the past. Those populations would have been the early people to also have domesticated animals and to have began agriculture and such. Now it's finished. It says, a study on population genomics of Anatolia, the Caucasus, and the Levant found in Arsel Netep one individual who lived circa 3396 through 3110 BC who belonged to E-M84, and that would basically be in the early Bronze Age. A study of the population genomics of Bronze Age Eurasia found in remains in Nerkin Getshan in Armenia lived during the Middle Bronze Age to E-M84 samples. So in the Middle Bronze Age we find E samples in Armenia, which is interesting. A study on population genomics of Anatolia, the Caucasus, and the Levant found in the ancient city of Ebla, which is what we're going to study today, during the Bronze Age. So in the Levant, we found an ancient city of Ebla during the Bronze Age, one male individual who was E-M84. And now the last, a study on South Asian history in Nar Shimhan et al. 2019 found several individuals who belonged to E-Y31991 in late Bronze Age / early Iron Age samples in the Swat Valley, modern northern Pakistan. So as we can see, these these E clades are expanding outward and they're getting younger. You have them very old in the Levant, but then as you get into the PPNB and as you get into the Chalcolithic and as you get into the early Bronze Age, and even the late Bronze Age and the early Iron Age, these E clades expand exactly in the same time period and from the same direction as Proto-Semitic, early Semitic peoples. And as you can see right here, all these dots represent some E samples that we found, as well as sites, Neolithic sites, and it goes all the way out into Mesopotamia, and then we find them even as far east as Pakistan in the late Bronze and early Iron Age. These E samples were getting around. And of course, E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B, and it's thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. This is from EUpedia, haplogroup E1B1B, Y-DNA. And this fits perfectly along with what we know about the migration and origin of Semites. We estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin, 5,750 years before present, in the Levant. That's 3750, by the way, BC. followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. So in 3750 BC, we have Semites in the Levant, and early Semitic peoples like the Akkadians would move into Mesopotamia. That is from Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East. And this fits along with what we see when it comes to DNA and the migrations of these E markers. This is from How Eurasia Was Born. The most plausible candidates for Semitic remigration to the Fertile Crescent with TMRCAs fitting the arrival of the Akkadians, like we just read, and other early Semitic peoples are certain subclades of both E-V22 and E-V12 with relatively early TMRCAs present in the Middle East could be candidates for such remigration, such as E-FGC14382, TMRCA is 2200 BC, and E-V3262, TMRCA is 2600 BC. So it all matches up. According to the theory, Afroasiatic languages spread to Asia via E1b haplogroup, not J1 haplogroup. It is historically known that a ruling elite class of Afroasiatic people, Akkadians, Assyrians, etc., also invaded the north of Mesopotamia and brought their Afroasiatic languages to the central and northern parts of Mesopotamia during the period of Akkadians and Babylonians. Elite dominance model of E1b1 might be supposed for Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. In this sense, it might be theorized that Sumerian was the main language of ancient Mesopotamians before Afroasiatic E1b overwhelmed Mesopotamia. Elite dominance model. That is from haplogroup J1. It's definitely not Semitic in origin, and that's true. So the elite dominance model, as I just read, basically Afroasiatic populations moving from the Levant into Mesopotamia carrying these E markers. Afroasiatic languages was spread via haplogroup E markers. And we can even see it when it comes to these migrations, like you can see on the screen here, slowly moving into Mesopotamia. So now we're going to look at one of the oldest known Semitic civilizations by the name of Ebla. Ebla was located in modern-day Syria. Ebla was an Eastern Semitic speaking civilization from 3000 to 2300 BC. The language of Ebla, also called Eblite, is a dialect of Akkadian, part of the East Semitic languages. Ebla was one of the earliest kingdoms in Syria. Ebla was an important center throughout the 3rd millennium BC and in the first half of the 2nd millennium BC. Its discovery proved the Levant was a center of ancient centralized civilization equal to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and ruled out the view that the latter two were the only important centers in the Near East during the early Bronze Age. The first Eblaite kingdom has been described as the first recorded world power. So that's why Ebla is very important. So let's learn about Ebla. So Ebla, as I said, is located in modern-day Syria. That's where modern-day Syria is, generally this area. And here's like the capital of Ebla, one of the important sites of Ebla that we will be looking into. So first Eblaite kingdom, 3000 BC through 2300 BC. That's when it was established and disestablished. And this is the Bronze Age, the early Bronze Age. And as I said, modern-day Syria, right here. And then here is what we'll be focusing on, Ebla, this dot right here, this city. Starting as a small settlement in the early Bronze Age, 3500 BC, Ebla developed into a trading empire and later into an expansionist power that imposed its hegemony over much of northern and eastern Syria. It was destroyed at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, which paved the way for the Amorite tribes to settle in the city. forming the third Ebla. The third kingdom also flourished as a trade center. It became a subject and an ally to Yamhad, and we've covered Yamhad in the past, until its final destruction by the Hittite king Mussolini I in 1600 BC, or Mur-Sului I. It's a Hittite. During the First Kingdom period between about 3000 to 23,000 BC, Ebla was the most prominent kingdom among the Syrian states, especially during the second half of the third millennium BC, which is known as the Age of the Archives, after the Eblaite tablets. The early period between 3000 and 24,000 BC is designated Merdek the second A. That's the period, Merdek the second A. So this book, you should check it out if you want to learn about Ebla. It's literally titled Ebla and its landscape, early state formation in the ancient Near East. And we're going to actually just really confirm and show you the time period in which Ebla was established. We need to know when it was established so that we can know how it fell, when it fell, and who, destroyed it. So let's go into the oldest period of Ebla. Following the still obscure centuries in the history of the first urban formations in Mesopotamia, to which the virtually unknown and certainly limited settlement of Merdek I of the proto-historic period circa 35,000 through 3000 BC dates back, the true urban development of Ebla probably took place during the early dynastic 1 through 3 periods of Mesopotamia, corresponding to the age of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and the still partly obscure phases of Merdek 3a circa 3000 through 24,000 BC, corresponding to the archaic early Syrian period, early dynastic 1 through 3, or early Bronze Age 1 through 3. The first flourishing of Ebla took place during Merdek II B1, the age of the royal archives, circa 24,000 through 23,000 BC, and the High Early Syrian period, early Bronze Age 4a, corresponding to the last decades of the early dynastic 3b period. Alright, so basically to sum all of this up, the Merdek period, the proto-historic period of Ebla, was 35,000 through 3000 BC. That's the oldest when it comes to Ebla. And then you have the Merdek 3a period, which was 3000 through 24,000 BC. And then you have the Merdek 2 B1 period, which is 24,000 through 23,000 BC. But the oldest, which is what we're looking at, which is important for our discussion, is 35,000 through 3000 BC. So this is from Mercer Dictionary of the Bible. And again, we're looking at the time period of Ebla, the history of Ebla. The excavations of Ebla reveal that the site was occupied from about 35,000 BCE, Chalcolithic to the 7th century BC Byzantine. But our focus is on the oldest, so 35,000 BCE. This is during the time period of the Chalcolithic, is when Ebla was occupied. So, very interesting. The language Eblite is like a dialect of Akkadian, part of the East Semitic languages. Let's look into the Eblite language. Eblite is an extinct East Semitic language used during the 3rd millennium BC by the populations of northern Syria. Eblaite language, archaic Semitic language, probably the most ancient to survive in substantial form, dating from the 3rd quarter of the 3rd millennium BC. As an North Central Semitic language, Eblite is affiliated with the Afro-Asiatic family of languages. And that makes sense because it is a Semitic language that is from Britannica. Again, we're back with Mercer Dictionary of the Bible, and we're going to deal with the Eblite language. These texts, along with the Eblite letters and juridical documents, comprise some of the oldest texts in a Semitic language. And this is why Eblite is also very important, because they have some of the oldest Semitic texts in the world. So Eblite as a language is difficult to classify and remains a matter of considerable discussion. Grammatically, Eblite is perhaps oldest to Old Akkadian, the Semitic language utilized by the Akkadian dynasty in southern Mesopotamia, documented slightly later than Eblite. Some grammatical forms, however, bear closer resemblance to Arabic or Southern Arabian. Lexically, Eblite seems closer to the West Semitic languages of Ugaritic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. This next source, titled The Semitic Languages, another great book to read and check out. East Semitic. Until the discovery of the Eblite texts, there was no reason to focus inquiry on the structure of East Semitic, since the only language assigned to that group was Akkadian, and Akkadian/East Semitic was what was left out of West Semitic. This treatment of Eblite as an East Semitic sibling of Akkadian is compatible with that of Kaplisi 1981, who suggests that Eblite is neither Akkadian nor West Semitic, and that of Gleb, who suggests that the closest relative of Eblite is Old Akkadian, without treating it as a dialect of Akkadian. Eblite designates the language of the largest archive known from anywhere in the world during the early Bronze Age, 3000 through 2000 BC. Eblite is a Semitic language embodying East and West Semitic features. And this, of course, is from the Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages, identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East, and it reads, Furthermore, Eblite, the closest relative of Akkadian, and the only other member of East Semitic, was spoken in the Levant, which is also where some of the oldest West Semitic languages were spoken. The presence of ancient members of the two oldest Semitic groups, East and West Semitic, in the region of the Levant, combined with the possible long interval of 100 through 3,000 years between the origin of Semitic and the appearance of Akkadian in Sumer, suggests a Semitic origin in the northeast Levant and a later movement of Akkadian eastward into Mesopotamia and Sumer. Again, a Levant origin of Semitic. So, there's even possible biblical connections with Ebla. The Ebla tablets had many names from the Bible as well as cities. So this is from the Ebla tablets mystery, and it reads, Ancient Ebla was located in northern Syria, approximately halfway between the modern cities of Hamath and Aleppo. Excavations at that site began in the 1960s and in the 1970s. A series of extraordinary tablets was discovered along the ruins of an ancient palace. These tablets became known as the Ebla tablets, and they were originally discovered under the direction of two professors from the University of Rome, Dr. Pello Metani and Dr. Giovanni Petneo. At this point, about 17,000 tablets from the ancient Eblite kingdom have been recovered. These tablets appear to have been written during the two last generations of ancient Ebla. This means that they were probably come from sometime around 23,000 and 2250 BC. But what is remarkable about the Ebla tablets is not how old they are, but rather the amazing parallels to the Bible that they contain. For example, One scholar was very surprised at just how close much of the language on the tablets is to ancient Hebrew. The vocabularies at Ebla were distinctively Semitic. The word to write is chute, as in Hebrew, while that for king is malakum, and that for man is adamu or adama. The closeness to Hebrew is surprising. In addition, a vast array of biblical names that have not been found in any other ancient Near East languages have been reported to have been found in similar forms in Ebelite, one of the two languages found on the tablets. For instance, the names of Adam, Eve, Abraham, Bela, Ishmael, Esau, Michael, Saul, and David have been found on the tablets. Now, it is important to note that the tablets are not necessarily referring to those specific people. Rather, what it does demonstrate is that those names were commonly used in ancient times. In addition, quite a few ancient biblical cities are also mentioned by name in the Ebla tablets. For example, Ashtoreth, Sinai, Jerusalem, Hazor, Lachish, Megiddo, Gaza, Jobah, and Damascus are all reportedly referred to by name in the tablets. Giovanni Petronio says that he also found references to the ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah in the tablets. In fact, one key discovery appears to relate directly to Genesis chapter 14. Some biblical skeptics have long tried to claim that the victory of Abraham over Chedorlaomer and the Mesopotamian kings in Genesis 14 was fictional, and that the 5 cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zebom, and Zor, referred to in that chapter are legendary. But it turns out that the Ebla tablets referred to all 5 of the cities of the plain, and that on one tablet the cities are listed in the exact same order that we find in Genesis chapter 14. The strange hymn, this is another thing we found. Even more extraordinarily was the discovery of a creation hymn in the tablets. In fact, 3 different versions of the Ebla creation hymn were discovered. One of the creation hymns was translated by Peti Neto as follows: Lord of heaven and earth, the Lord was not, you created it. The light of the day was not, you created it. The morning light you had not yet made exist. This clearly parallels the biblical account. In the Bible, we find a Lord of heaven and earth who created the earth and everything around it out of nothing. However, here's a caveat, however, it is important to note that Ebla was primarily a pagan culture. Pagan gods such as Dagon, Bel, and Ishtar were very important to the people of the time. But the truth is that these tablets do confirm quite a few historical details found in the scriptures. With that being said, these tablets, the Ebla tablets, they're very controversial, so I want to also point that out as well. When you study them, you're going to find a lot of controversy concerning the Ebla tablets. But either way, I think it's very interesting that, this city has very interesting parallels if these tablets are indeed true. And also, like I said, at the very end of the day, it's still a Semitic kingdom. It's still a kingdom that had Semites ruling it and populating it. So up next is a visual of the Ebla tablets, but also I have a video because some people actually posit that Eber built Ebla. So this next video, and we'll cover that Ebla may have been a city ruled by some famous people in the scriptures like Eber. But here are the Ebla tablets, and as I said, there's supposed to be 17,000 Ebla tablets. Some place it at 16 plus clay tablets, but as of now, I think it's 17,000 Ebla tablets, all written in cuneiform, and it's a very interesting city. And this is the video that will cover the interesting connection between Ebla and Eber, and the fact that, you know, Eber may have built Ebla, but definitely it was Semitic people that built the city of Ebla. Whether it's Eber or not, I just think it's interesting that it could be Eber. Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Eber was born 4 generations after Noah, just 3 generations after the Great Flood. The name Eber derives its meaning from the Hebrew word abar, which means to pass over, or region across or beyond. Thus, the name Eber hints of his crossing over the Euphrates River away from the land of Sin in Mesopotamia, where the Tower of Babel would be constructed. Now, the word Hebrew is derived from the same root word of Eber, indicating that Eber is an ancestor of the Hebrew nation. We find something peculiar in the genealogy of the descendants of Noah in Genesis chapter 10. In Genesis 10:21, when God introduces the line of Shem, the record changes its format and adds an introduction to the genealogy. God highlights Eber's significance by praising him even before listing Shem's descendants, calling Shem the father of the children of Eber. Think about that. Shem's son was Arpachshad, and his grandson was Shelah, but God sets them to the side for a moment to express that Shem's descendants were the children of Eber. As Noah had called God the God of Shem, now God expresses a passing of the torch to Shem's descendant Eber, and in this manner points to Eber as an important link to Abraham. Now, according to clay tablets discovered around the region of what is now Aleppo in Syria, there existed a highly civilized city-state in the region called Ebla. It is believed that Eber was its founding king, and that the city-state had previously existed as a small city, but was established as a large city-state during Eber's time. According to those clay tablets, the kingdom of Ebla flourished in the arts and academic fields, and reached its peak around 2300 BC when Eber ruled. Records of tribute receipts from the nations in the Euphrates region were excavated from that site, giving credence to the theory that the kingdom of Ebla was the most powerful kingdom in the ancient Near East at that time. This also enforces the assertion that due to the meaning of his name, at the time when the Tower of Babel was being construction, and mankind was once again turning away from God, Eber crossed over the river Euphrates away from Mesopotamia, going toward Haran, and erected his city to maintain his orthodox faith in God.
So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this lecture. One of the oldest Y DNA chromosomes found in the Semitic kingdom of Ebla was the Afro-Asiatic haplogroup E. According to ancient DNA analysis conducted by Sek Nor-Tanoti et al. 2020 on 10 human remains from Tel Murdoch, the inhabitants of the kingdom of Ebla were a mixture of Levantines, Iranians, and Anatolians. One early Bronze Age, 2700 through 2500 BC individual carried haplogroup E1b1, a lineage closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. So one individual from the early Bronze Age carried haplogroup E1b1b, a lineage closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. While for Middle Bronze Age, 2000 through 18,000 BC, individuals carried haplogroups G, J1, and T. So for Middle Bronze Age, 2000 through 18,000 BC, individuals carried haplogroups G, J1, and T. And here's why this is important. So, the Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have arrived at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including the current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist populations. Eblite language, archaic Semitic language, probably the most ancient to survive in substantial form, dating from the third quarter of the 3rd millennium BC as a North Central Semitic language. Eblite is affiliated with the Afro-Asiatic family of languages. So Eblite is Afro-Asiatic Semitic language, of course. Therefore, it makes perfect sense to describe this early Bronze Age sample that carried haplogroup E1b1b as, a lineage that's closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. It's likely this individual is definitely a Semitic person. So here is where we found this Ebla sample. It is the E-L795 branch, and it's again found in Ebla. This is the guy. So we found haplogroup E in 27,000 through 25,000 BC in Ebla. It's in that time range. And this is during the height of the first kingdom of Ebla. Again, 3000 BC through 23,000 BC, the first Eblite kingdom. And it's around this time period. From 4,600 through 3,800 years before present. That is around this time, the early Bronze Age period. And we found it in Ebla. During the first kingdom period between about 3000 and 23,000 BC, Ebla was the most prominent kingdom among the Syrian states, especially during the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, which is known as the Age of the Archives, after the Ebla tablets. That's the time period we find the Ebla tablets. The early period between 3000 and 24,000 BC is designated as Merkida 2A. If you recall from what we read, one of the earliest samples we found in Ebla was the Afro-Asiatic haplogroup E sample, which is associated with Proto-Semites. But a few centuries later, in 2000 through 25,000 BC, we find other Y chromosomes such as haplogroup G and J1. So the earliest Ebla sample was an Afro-Asiatic haplogroup E sample. But in the Middle Bronze Age, we find haplogroup G and J1. Interestingly enough, genetically, we do see two different peoples, haplogroup E having more Levantine ancestry, whereas haplogroup G and J1 has more Iranian and Anatolian ancestry. Let's read that again. 10 human remains were found in 2020. The inhabitants of the kingdom of Ebla were a mixture of Levantines, Iranians, and Anatolians. The Levantine mixture likely would have belonged to the haplogroup E, whereas the Iranians and the Anatolians likely belonged to haplogroups G, J1, and T. One early Bronze Age individual carried haplogroup E1b1b, a lineage closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. Again, this is the early Bronze Age, 27,000 through 25,000 BC, whereas we find Middle Bronze Age individuals carrying haplogroups G, J1, and T, and the Middle Bronze Age is 2000 through 18,000 BC. So genetic overturn did take place in the Bronze Age Northern Levant. Ebla is a perfect example of this, and this paper will explain why. This paper is titled Genomic History of Neolithic to Bronze Age Anatolia, Northern Levant, and Southern Caucasus. So it reads, we find that 6th millennium BCE populations of North/Central Anatolia and the Southern Caucasus shared mixed ancestry on a genetic line that formed during the Neolithic between Western Anatolia and regions in today's Southern Caucasus / Zagros. So all these populations, they share a mixed ancestry. North / Central Anatolia and the Southern Caucasus share mixed ancestry. And this all connects to today's Southern Caucasus and the Zagros. So during the late Chalcolithic and / or the early Bronze Age, more than half of the northern Levantine gene pool was replaced, and that is the key thing that we are going to be looking into. During the late Chalcolithic and / or the early Bronze Age, more than half of the northern Levantine gene pool was replaced. So there was genetic replacement. While in the rest of Anatolia and the Southern Caucasus, we document genetic continuity and only transit gene flow. So basically, in the rest of Anatolia and the Southern Caucasus, people remained the same. But this genetic replacement basically only took place in the northern Levant. That's very interesting, important to keep in mind. Overall, our studies uncovers multiple scales of population dynamics through time, from extensive admixture during the Neolithic period to long-distance mobility within the globalized societies of the late Bronze Age. Throughout Western Asia, archaeological evidence for the movement of people's material and / or ideas is well documented. At the same time, during the second half of the 4th millennium BCE, the Araxes culture, which is something we covered extensively on this channel, check out my older videos, which is generally thought to originate in the Southern Caucasus, expanded outward around 3000 through 29,000 BCE. So it's around 3000 BC through 29,000 BC when the Araxes culture began to expand outwards. And they're expanding from the Southern Caucasus, spreading westward to eastern Anatolia and northern and southern Levant, and eastward to Iran. So basically, the Araxes culture began to expand in all directions in 3000 through 29,000 BCE. They went into Anatolia, they went into Iran, and they went into the Levant. So here is a map of the Araxes culture from this paper. It says 4th through 3rd millennium BC. And as you can see, it goes into Iran, it goes into Anatolia, and it goes into the Levant. And again, this is a foreign population that would not have spoken Semitic languages. They would have spoken Caucasian languages. They are a Caucasian people, an ancient Caucasian people. And they expand even into the Levant. We find that mid-6th millennium populations from north / central Anatolia and the Southern Caucasus lowlands were closely connected. So Anatolian and Southern Caucasian populations are connected. They form a genetic gradient line that runs from Western Anatolia to the Southern Caucasus and Zagros in today's northern Iran. So that's kind of where you see this genetic connection. It runs from the Western Anatolia, the Southern Caucasus, and northern Iran. These clines formed after an admixture event that biologically connected these two regions circa 6500 BCE. Chalcolithic and Bronze Age populations across Anatolia also mostly descended from those genetic gradients. In the northern Levant, by contrast, we identified a major genetic shift between the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age periods. So again, this is key. In the northern Levant, by contrast, we identified a major genetic shift between the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age periods. So something changed in the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age periods. A genetic change happened, and it was major. So during this transition, northern Levantine populations experienced gene flow from new groups harboring ancestries related to both Zagros / Caucasus and the southern Levant. So new people came in, and these people had both Zagros Caucasus DNA but also another group with Southern Levant DNA. So there was a change that happened, and these two groups would have been different. So here is the Ebla sample, by the way, that we are focusing on, Ebla. And this is Ebla, and if you can see the EMBA, EMBA stands for Early Middle Bronze Age. And this is from Ebla Tel Merdek. Let me just do a closer image. So again, when you look at the these different shapes and colors, we're focusing on the gray box, which is Ebla, the gray box. And here is it right here as well, the gray box. Ebla, Early Middle Bronze Age, EMBA, and MLBA stands for Middle Late Bronze Age. So this is what we're dealing with. And again, just to show you again, the gray box, this is our main focus. The gray box, Ebla, Early Middle Bronze Age. Ebla, Tel Merdek. And again, this is another chart from the study. And we have Ebla. Again, the box, the gray box, Ebla. And I'm going to zoom in and show you that these Ebla samples are genetically closest to Levant samples. And this would make sense if people such as the Natufians would represent, or Neolithic Levantines would represent early Semitic peoples. This right here is evidence of that. You have the Ebla samples connected to the northern Levant genetically, and genetically these Ebla samples are connected to Levantine populations. So let me zoom in. So here it is. You have Levant right here, all these Levant samples. And as we can see, the Ebla, the box, and this is Southern Levant Epio-Paleolithic Bronze Age, or should I say Epio-Paleolithic through the Bronze Age. And that's all these Levantine samples. So it's like basically pink, purple triangles, a circle, and a box. And Ebla is very close to it. Ebla is close to these Levantine samples. Let me just show you from another angle. Here is in Levant with Ebla, and then here's the genetic shift. The genetic shift occurs in the northern Levant, and it changes things. So this is early through Middle Bronze Age, and this is northern Levant. And then there's a genetic outlier in northern Levant, this one, and then this comes in right here. So hopefully y'all can kind of see that. But this reading will kind of explain those charts. So genetic turnover in the Bronze Age northern Levant. The northern Levant, represented by the sites Tel Kurdu, Ebla, which is our focus, and Alakhe, showcases the most noticeable genetic turnover among our four time transects. Within 2 millennia after the last Middle Chalcolithic Tel Kurdu individual, the genetic profile of the populations in and around the Akhum Valley changed to largely resemble contemporaneous Anatolians. So I'm going to read that again. Within 2 millennia after the last Middle Chalcolithic Tel Kurdu individual, the genetic profile of the populations in and around the Akhum Valley changed to largely resemble contemporaneous Anatolians. So that population changed to basically look like Anatolian peoples. However, the QBADM modeling between Bauk Kaya EC suggests that Alalaka, Middle Late Bronze Age, and Ebla, Early Middle Bronze Age, are still distinct from the other Anatolian groups with respect to their connection to the ancient Southern Levant. And that's what I really want y'all to get from this, is that the Alalak Middle Late Bronze Age and the Ebla early Middle Bronze Age samples, they're distinct from the Anatolian groups. They're not Anatolian. They're not an Anatolian people. These Ebla samples are connected to the ancient southern Levant, which makes sense if they are a people who descends from Neolithic Levantines, who descend from more or so Natufian populations, therefore making them Semitic. This would make sense. So in addition, Barkin N/Tel Kurdu EC and/or ancient Caucasian groups cannot successfully model Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age, and Alalakh, Middle Late Bronze Age, in QPADM, suggesting that these sources do not represent good proxies of their true ancestries. So let's break this section down right here. So basically, ancient Caucasian groups cannot successfully model Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age, and Alalakh, Middle Late Bronze Age. And by the way, that's how I'm going to pronounce it, Alalakh. And when it comes to genetics, they cannot be successfully modeled with ancient Caucasian groups, suggesting that these sources do not represent good proxies of their true ancestries. So these Semitic sites, or these Semitic samples of Ebla, Middle Late Bronze Age, and Alalakh, Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age, and Alalakh, Middle Late Bronze Age, they're not genetically Caucasian. They don't link to ancient Caucasian groups, but they link to ancient southern Levantine populations, which would of course be genetically Neolithic Levantine and Natufian. So I do want to illustrate that there is a difference between these Ebla samples and these ancient Caucasian groups. They don't fit, and they're distinct. Again, Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age are still distinct from other Anatolian groups with respect to their connection to ancient southern Levant, that's basically Natufians, and in addition, ancient Caucasian groups cannot successfully model Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age, suggesting that these sources do not represent good proxies of their true ancestries. These Ebla, early Middle Late Bronze Age people are not ancient Caucasians nor Anatolians. They're more or so linked to Neolithic Levantines and Natufians. And again, this also will illustrate that fact. Most LC-LBA groups are adequately modeled by adding the second ancestry of ancient Iran/Caucasus populations, while Alalakh, Middle Late Bronze Age, and Ebla, early Middle Bronze Age, requires a substantial contribution from ancient southern Levantine populations. Again, Ebla is connected to ancient southern Levantine populations. Taking the above into consideration, we suggest that the ancestries we inferred for Alalakh and Ebla might best describe the genetic makeup of the early Bronze Age populations of unsampled northern Mesopotamia. Now that's powerful. During the following Middle Bronze Age and Late Bronze Age, we find no evidence of genetic disruption, even though shifts in territorial control dynamics between kingdoms/empires affected Ebla and Alalakh's social-cultural development. So what's interesting to me about this part of the paper is the very first sentence. Taking the above into consideration, we suggest that the ancestries we inferred for Alalakh and Ebla might best describe the genetic makeup of early Bronze Age populations of unsampled northern Mesopotamia. So this shows you that it is quite possible that other northern Mesopotamian samples are just like the Ebla samples in the early Bronze Age, and if Ebla is linked to the ancient southern Levant, then this is basically implying that other early Bronze Age northern Mesopotamian samples are also linked to the ancient southern Levant, which would mean a lot of these populations with this ancient southern Levantine ancestry likely descend from Natufians and are likely other early Semitic populations. I think that's very, very key, important to keep in mind. So what do we know so far? Ebla existed around 3000 through 23,000 BC. It is a East Semitic kingdom. Ebla in 27 through 25,000 BC, we found haplogroup E. Ebolites genetically are the same as ancient southern Levantines, which basically Natufians. Ebolites genetically are different from Anatolian, Zagros, and Caucasians. By the way, this is why I see haplogroup E and Levantine DNA as Proto-Semitic, as I have described in previous videos. This paper makes an additional inference, since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. That is from In Hot Pursuit of Language and Prehistory. E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1b and is thought to have arrived with Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. And again, the area of Natufian culture. It encompasses the exact same homeland of Proto-Semites because Semites likely descend from Natufians. Furthermore, like the study said, the Ebla sample, which is found in Syria, modern-day Syria, is genetically tied to southern Levantines, which would be down here, likely because Ebla and all Semites come from Natufians. So what do we know so far? During the early Bronze Age, more than half of the northern Levantine gene pool was replaced. The core Araxes culture was expanding in this time. Furthermore, the northern Levant had major genetic shift in the Bronze Age periods. The northern Levantine populations experienced gene flow from new groups harboring ancestries related to both Zagros, Iranian/Caucasians. Ebla showcased the most notable genetic turnover. What happened during Bronze Age Ebla? This is the question we must ask ourselves because we can see genetically something changed and shifted, but what happened historically in Bronze Age Ebla that can match the genetic turnover we see? Who were the people that caused the genetic turnover in the northern Levant? One of the major groups in this period of the Bronze Age that attacked, destroyed, and even rules Ebla was, drumroll please, the Hurrians. That's right. Some of y'all, maybe most of y'all, probably already caught who the perpetrators would be. But it was the Hurrians that actually destroyed Ebla around the time of the Bronze Age. So let's get into that. From this same paper, consequently, these interpretive caveats call for consideration of alternative historical scenarios, including scenarios of multiple gene flow events that could have taken place in the intervening 2 millennia between the Tel Kurdu population and those of Bronze Age Ebla and Alalak. However, written sources, archaeological and paleoclimatic evidence suggests that a narrower time period, the end of the early Bronze Age, had been very critical with respect to political tensions and population mobility. It was during this period, for example, that Ebla was destroyed twice and re-established at the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. So Ebla was destroyed twice. Very interesting. There are extensive textual references from the end of the early Bronze Age through the late Bronze Age, referring to groups of people arriving into the area of the Qom Valley So there is textual evidence of groups of people arriving into the land. Although these groups were named likely based on designations, Amorites, Hurrians, so the Hurrians are part of this designation of groups, the formative context of their cultural identity and their geographic origins remains debated. One recent hypothesis associates the arrival of these groups with climate-forced population movement during the 4.2 K MP event, a mega drought that led to the abandonment of the entire Kabir River Valley in northern Mesopotamia and the search of nearby habitable areas. By the way, that's around the area of the Kora Araxes, which is, of course, the Kora Araxes culture, and, of course, connected to the Hurrians. So, basically, in a way, they're basically saying Hurrians. So let's actually look into the textual evidence of the people that destroyed Ebla. This book is titled Epic and History, and it's going to details various epics and history, but we're going to focus on the destruction of Ebla. So it reads, in this chapter, I study old Hittite historiographic texts and the Song of Release, a Hurru Hittite epic discovered in 1983 about the destruction of the northern Syrian city of Ebla. Again, the destruction of the northern Syrian city of Ebla. The Song of Release takes part in the same tradition of Hurru Hittite song embodied in the Song of Kamamari and the Song of Gilgamesh, attested in both Hurrian and Hittite at Hutasa, and like them, it has Mesopotamian and/or North Syrian root origins and Greek descendants. The narrative of the Song of Release, written in parallel columns with the Hurrian version to the left and the Hittite translation to the right, somehow combines a series of animal parables with the epic storyline concerning the destruction of Ebla. Turning now to the relationship of the Song of Release to historical events, the story can be linked to either of two destructions of Ebla, just like what the genetic paper said, two destructions of Ebla. So now here is another book that details Hittite history. This book is called Hittite Archaeology and History. So it reads, we know that the city of Ekarelis, which in the epic is the antagonist of Ebla, was conquered by Hattusili I during the campaign in which he also seized Alalak. And of course, Alalak was another sample that we found that basically didn't match any of the other Anatolian or Caucasian populations. So it's interesting how in this time period you have one of the Hattusa the first, Hittite, conquer Ebla and Alalak around the same time. And it's both the Ebla sample and the Alalak sample that aren't genetically related to Anatolians, and Hittites are an Anatolian people. But continuing, it says, the destruction threatened at the beginning of the Hurrian text would therefore be that which brought an end to Middle Bronze Age Ebla. Now that's fascinating, so let's go even further. The destruction threatened at the beginning of the Hurrian text would therefore be that which brought an end to Middle Bronze Age Ebla. For the archaeological date concerning Ebla in the 2nd millennium BC, so that's the time period it happened, Tuseb declares, I will destroy the city of Ebla. I will reduce it to a snare, as though it had never been inhabited. I will smash the walls of the lower city like a cup. The walls of the upper city I will trample like a pile of rubbish. So that's a little section from what Tuseb or Tusheb, I'm going to say Tuseb, that's what he declares he will do to Ebla, that he's going to destroy the city of Ebla. And of course, the city of Ebla does get destroyed. Tuseb's threat foretells the fate of Ebla, and the description of an acropolis and lower city is fitting. Such a description, however, would fit most of the cities of the Middle Bronze Age. So again, it's believed that that Ebla was destroyed by these Hurrian Hittites in the Middle Bronze Age. And so now let's look at yet again another source dealing with the destruction of Ebla by the Hurrians and the Hittites. This book, titled Ebelitica, Essays on the Ebla Archives and Ebelite Language. So it reads, the conclusion from this survey is that the destruction of Ebla's elders on the eye of the city's destruction fits the end of the Merdek 2b2 period, but is incompatible with the conditions obtaining in northern Syria toward the end of the Merdek 3b period during the last decade or two of the first dynasty of Babylon. An analysis of the Hurrian language in the bilingual leads to the same conclusion. According to New, it displays several features in common with the earliest known Hurrian texts. The degradatory inscription of Tis-Atel, king of Ugarish. The act attributed to Tuseb must be assumed to have been performed by the actual conquerors and destroyers of Ebla, and refer back to what I read when it came to Tuseb's little war speech, what he said he was going to do. Tuseb declares, I will destroy the city of Ebla, I will reduce it to a state as though it had never been inhabited. I will smash the walls of the lower city like a cup. The walls of the upper city I will trample like a pile of rubbish. So going back to this book, it says the act attributed to Tuseb must be assumed to have been performed by the actual conquerors and destroyers of Ebla. And the reason why that's worded that way is because Tuseb is actually one of the Hittite or Hurrian gods, or I guess you can say Huru Hittite god. And back then they often wrote about the gods destroying these cities. That's just the way ancient people in the Near East wrote like that. But really it was the Hurrians and the Hittites that destroyed Ebla. But that's why it's kind of worded that way. Prefers in order to protect themselves from the hostile miasma that might have been thought to hover over the ruined city. The Hurru-Hittite bilingual clearly ascribes the destruction of Ebla to Hurrians. I'm going to read that again because that is powerful. The Hurru-Hittite bilingual clearly ascribes the destruction of Ebla to Hurrians. All of the names of Ebla's adversaries, Pura, Pezria, Arabel Abila, Parabel Ilba, and Esa Palbu, are Hurrian. So all of Ebla's adversaries, all of the adversaries of these Eastern Semitic people are Hurrians. The Hurrians moved from Trans-Tigris, or the Trans-Tigris, to northern Mesopotamia, and from northern Mesopotamia to northern Syria, as evidenced by the role of cities in these regions as divine residences or by deified avatars of patron deities revered by the Hurrians in northern Syria and Anatolia. Now, all of this is very powerful because this fits with the genetic study that we read, because these Hurrians, who are groups coming from the north, came in to northern Syria. These Hurrian groups coming from Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia, which would be the Caucasus, coming into northern Syria and basically destroying Ebla. And that fits exactly with what the genetic paper said. During the late Chalcolithic and/or the early Bronze Age, more than half of the northern Levantine gene pool was replaced, while the rest of Anatolia and the southern Caucasus, we document genetic continuity with only transit gene flow. So more than half of the northern Levantine gene pool was replaced, and it was specifically replaced by people from Anatolia and the southern Caucasus. And again, this is where the Hurrians would also be coming from, the core Araxes culture. And we know that these people came into the Levant. I'm just going to read this source. At the same time, during the second half of the 4th millennium BCE, the core Araxes culture, which is generally thought to originate in the southern Caucasus, expanded outward around 3000 through 29,000 BCE, spreading westward to eastern Anatolia and the northern and southern Levant and eastern Iran. So people from the core Araxes culture came into the northern and southern Levant. Here's a map of that, and this would be Hurrian peoples. And again, I'm going to read right here what's in yellow. In the northern Levant, by contrast, we identified a major genetic shift between the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age periods. During this transition, northern Levantine populations experienced gene flow from new groups harboring ancestries related to both Zagros/Caucasus and the southern Levant. So new groups having Zagros/Caucasus DNA, they came into the northern Levant. And that fits perfectly with this destruction of Ebla by the Hurrians, who are also coming from the Zagros-Caucasus region and are culturally and linguistically connected to the core Araxes culture. So let's return back to our reading and bring all of this together. Immediately after the takeover of Ebla, its new ruler ordered the construction of the great earth rampart around the city, a point in time made certain by the presence of shards of Marduk II B2 pottery, but not any from Marduk IIIa, in the rubble partially used for its erection. The rebuilt Ebla once again became a great and prosperous city. During Middle Bronze I, it was ruled by a dynasty that was not Amorite, as presumed, but Hurrian. So I'm going to read that again. During the Middle Bronze Age I, it was ruled by a dynasty that was not Amorite, but Hurrian. It became Amorite in the political sense of the word only at the beginning of the Middle Bronze II, when it was taken over by the kingdom of Yamhad. And study and check out my video titled The Hurrians and the Yamhad, because there was a very heavy Hurrian population in Yamhad as well. The wave of destruction in northern Syria. It was customary among archaeologists to synchronize the end of the early Bronze Age 4B in Syria with the downfall of the Ur-3 Empire, given or taken a few decades. The destruction of Ebla 2B2 fit well with the time frame. Moreover, it was noted that Ebla was not alone in having been destroyed then. So Ebla wasn't the only Semitic kingdom to be destroyed in this time frame. There was other Semitic city-states and kingdoms and civilizations that were also destroyed around this time. As attested by Matani, it is very difficult to fix the exact date of this tragic event. As I have already said, the 2000 BC dating is purely formal. On the other hand, comparative analysis from other contemporary centers of the Syrian area, all of which from the Aqawm to Hama, show the same destruction, indicates that the catastrophe which overwhelmed the late Proto-Syrian culture must in any case be dated in various Upper Syrian cities which were destroyed by it between 2050 and 1950 BC. So again, Ebla was not the only city-state to be destroyed in this time frame. Other Semitic city-states and Syrian cities were destroyed between 2050 and 1950 BC. And basically, it was destroyed by these Hurrians. Again, Hurrians, a non-Semitic people from the Zagros Caucasus. And, as I've stated in the past, these peoples likely would have carried haplogroup J. We know, according to the genetic papers, that these people who are entering into northern Levant and destroying these northern Levantine cities, they carried Zagros Iranian and Caucasian and Anatolian DNA. We know that it was those types of people that destroyed Semitic empires. Therefore, I would never say that Caucasians or Iranians or Anatolians are Semites. They are the ones who are destroying Semitic civilizations in the early Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age period. Because genetically we see these people coming into already established Semitic cities and destroying them. You can't be Semitic if you're just now entering into city-states that are already Semitic speaking for centuries, thousands of years even. So, Hurrians destroyed the kingdom of Ebla. But perhaps this explains the genetic turnover that occurred in the Bronze Age northern Levant. This also explains why in the Middle Bronze Age, 2000 through 18,000 BC, we see haplogroups such as J appear in Ebla, whereas beforehand we saw haplogroup E in the earliest period of Ebla in 27 through 25,000 BC. Remember, the inhabitants of the kingdom of Ebla were a mixture of Levantines, that would likely be your Semites, Iranians, and Anatolians, that would be your conquerors. One early Bronze Age, 2700 through 2500 BC individual carried haplogroup E1B1B, a lineage closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. And we know that Ebla is an Afro-Asiatic language, an extremely old one when it comes to the Semitic branch. Ebelite language, archaic Semitic language, probably the most ancient to survive in substantial form, dating from the 3rd quarter of the 3rd millennium BC as a northern Central Semitic language. Ebelite is affiliated with the Afro-Asiatic family of languages. And of course, we know that Afro-Asiatics are typically associated with haplogroup E, as the paper just said. Haplogroup E1B1B, a lineage closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. However, here's the kicker. While 4 Middle Bronze Age individuals carried haplogroups G, J1, and T, and this Middle Bronze Age is from 2000 through 18,000 BC. So again, basically, in the early period of Ebla, early Bronze Age, we found an E sample, 27,000 through 25,000 BC, versus the Middle Bronze Age samples that are dated from 2000 through 18,000 BC, which are G, J1, and T markers. Clearly something changed, and clearly there is a difference, even when it comes to the autosomal DNA, I guess you can say, of the Ebla samples. You have Levantines Iranians and Anatolians. And the Levantine samples, according to the paper, were more so genetically related to ancient southern Levantines, which would be your Natufians, which makes sense why you'll find an E sample there. And then you have the Iranian, Caucasian, or the Zagros Anatolian peoples that come in later. And as we saw when it fits into history, these Hurrian groups destroyed Ebla, and of course they also ruled over it once they destroyed it, which is why later you'll see these J and G markers. The fall of Ebla is just further evidence that populations such as from the north, like the Hurrians, these populations are not Semitic. Haplogroup J, Zagros Iranian DNA, that would not be Semitic. The reasons for the collapse of Semitic civilizations is because of Hurrian groups and other groups related to the Hurrians. The Hurrians would have carried Y DNA chromosome haplogroup J and Zagros/Caucasian ancestry. Again, this DNA appears and there's genetic turnover in the Levant, which goes to show you that it wasn't there previously. These Semitic civilizations were already ruling and doing their own thing, but genetic turnover happened. That goes to show you that they weren't there originally. They came in and collapsed the northern Levant, places like Ebla, and then established themselves there. If they're coming in and there's genetic overturn, that means they weren't there originally, which means that J markers and Zagros Caucasian DNA isn't Semitic. It came and destroyed the Semitic civilizations. Again, the Northeast Caucasian language family seems to show clear links to ancient Eastern Anatolia, as most subclades of J1-Z1842 TMRCAs 4300 BCE can be linked to the Armenian highlands in present-day Azerbaijan, precisely fitting the exact location of the core Araxes culture, 3400 BCE through 2000 BCE. Three subclades of it, J1-ZS3042 TMRCAs 3500 BCE, J1-ZS5658 TMRCAs 2800 BCE, J1-ZS2872 2800 BCE, and J1-Y5353 TMRCAs 2500 BC, are widespread among Northeast Caucasian groups, suggest Northeast Caucasian languages to have originated from the core Araxes culture, as ancient J1 subclades also seem to have been present in the ancient Levant as well. This supports the existence of the Alduin language family, linking Hurrian to Northeast Caucasian. Again, Northeast Caucasians, core Araxes culture, Hurrians, all linked to haplogroup J, to early non-Semitic speakers that come into Semitic lands like Ebla and destroy it and then rule over it. Again, we found, and by the way, that is from How Eurasia Was Born, we found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians. Again, that's what the other genetic paper was showing, ancient Iranian Zagros groups coming into Ebla that weren't there before. We found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians that is ubiquitous today in all Middle Easterners. Previous studies show that this ancestry was not present in the Levant during the Neolithic period. Again, it was not present in Levant, but appeared in the Bronze Age. This is when Ebla fell, where 50% of the local ancestry, being the Semites, was replaced by a population carrying ancient Iranian-related DNA. Again, this fits perfectly, the local population being your Ebla people, and this is just talking about the Levant in general, the local population of the entire Levant being, for the most part, Neolithic Levantine, like the Ebla samples that are connected to the southern Levant. These people in the Bronze Age that had Neolithic Levantine DNA, 50% of it was replaced by people carrying ancient Iranian DNA. This fits the time period of the migration of Araxes Hurrian tribesmen into Levantine cities like Ebla, I'm using Ebla as an example, who destroy it and then rule over it. Again, it was Zagros Caucasian DNA that overpowered, that had genetic turnover in the northern Levant, as an example. These populations potentially introduced the Y chromosome haplogroup J1 into the region, and this is the same time period you see J1 enter into the region. Like with the Ebla samples, Middle Bronze Age, that's when you see G and J1 and T, where focus is J1. Whereas the older Ebla sample had haplogroup E, again likely a Semite, connected to the Afroasiatic language family. Haplogroup J in ancient Iranian/Caucasian ancestry is not the genome of Proto-Semitic populations because it's coming in. It's a newcomer. It comes in when Semites have already existed. Rather, it was northern populations carrying haplogroup J in Irano-Caucasian ancestry that collapsed many of the ancient Semitic civilizations like Ebla. Another perfect example, was Ebla, a Semitic civilization destroyed by Hurrians. The oldest samples in Ebla in the early Bronze Age had haplogroup E, which is Afroasiatic, whereas the later haplogroups in the Middle Bronze Age of the collapse was J markers, among others, of course. But with all of that being said, this is where we end the video. Ebla, the downfall of a Semitic kingdom. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe and share the video. Click the bell, leave a comment for any questions you might have, and follow my social media platforms that you are about to see here in a few minutes. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.